When I made my Poison Scourge of Menace build video, I talked about a few things that I'd like to do next, and well, I've done them, and a lot of other stuff. So today, I have a build showcase of my final Caustic Arrow of Poison plus Scourge Arrow of Menace plus Storm Rain build, which is a little bit of a mouthful. So I'd like you to come up with a better name and leave it down in the comments below. Now, I have killed some uber bosses, but this is still primarily a mapping build. I never really solved the problem of penetration or non-ailment damage over time. I just decided that those weren't really a thing if I was mapping anyway. I've taken on everything from the uber elder encounter, to absolutely annihilating the King in the Mist, and even going into the worst possible 100% deli, extra resistances map, and then clicking all the wisps, and then killing everything. Which I think is kind of the ultimate test of a mapping build, and not something that I advise you do since it took quite a long time for the loot that it gave. I would have been better off just running a normal map and dropping a few more divines. But if you're looking for a well-rounded mapper, or maybe a tanky bow build, then this is my Caustic Arrow, Scourge Arrow, Poison Pathfinder. And if you want to see a little bit more information on ways to make money in Path of Exile, well, do be sure to get subscribed as I have a couple projects coming out soon. And maybe leave a like while you're down there. But for now, let's get into things. Because this is a showcase, I'm going to skip the key mechanics. You can watch my Scourge Arrow of Menace video if you want to know more about some of the finer details. So here we go. Pathfinder Ascendancy. Master Toxicist, Nature's Reprisal, Nature's Adrenaline. And then small nodes, because here's the awkward thing. I don't have a life flask, so I can't use Master Surgeon. I don't have anything that benefits from Master Distiller. I guess, in theory, Fizz's extra chaos would mean I'd die a lot more because it would just eat all the charges from my Progenesis. That's a really bad idea. And I have one magic utility flask. I guess in theory, if I could jump over to Master Alchemist, that would be useful, but they haven't invented Thread of Hope for your Ascendancy yet. I'm sure it's coming soon, though. And then, with my Wildwood Ascendancy, yeah, kind of the same thing. I'm just grabbing the extra Wisp bonus for more juice in my maps. Then coming over here, I've got this beautiful wheel. Now, if you're playing pure Scourge Arrow, you don't actually need piercing shots. But if you're playing Caustic Arrow, I did find it quite helpful. The big difference between Caustic Arrow of Poison and Scourge Arrow of Menace is Scourge Arrow of Menace has much better clear, but Caustic Arrow of Poison has better single target and less lag, so I ended up sticking with a mix of both. Then, coming up here, I've got my beautiful Storm Shroud that's keeping me ailment immune. Few people missed this in the last video. Yes, you do need Storm Shroud with the boots to be ailment immune. And for a video on how to craft the boots, well, check the card or the description after this. I swapped over to a cluster with Unwaveringly Evil and Unholy Grace. I was really focused before on keeping to the 4.0 APS, but as my gear got better and better, I stopped caring as much. Right now, my Manaforge setup is still a significant portion of my DPS. I think it's about 20%. But it's down a lot from where it was before, so it's not as important that I decided to get extra damage on my self-attack. For clusters, I now went with Flow of Life and Wasting Affliction on my mediums. I wanted a little bit more damage immediacy and felt my poison duration was long enough. Of course, I stuck with Blood Notch, and yes, I know, I probably should have replaced or corrupted that one. You know what? Let's do it live. Maybe I'll get Corrupted Blood, or maybe I'll completely destroy an item and have to replace it after a video. That's just kind of some of the fun of making content, right? Nothing happened. That's a boring answer. That's the worst answer. Remember to have the Energy Shield Mastery for Stun Threshold is based off of Energy Shield and have no Energy Shield. I did try a little bit using Eldritch Battery to remove the ES. It's not fun. Don't do that. Just don't have Energy Shield on your gear. I got a new Watcher's Eye, which I'm using to cap suppress. Malevolence, unaffected by bleed, could probably be better, but I was too lazy to buy a triple mod eye for like 150 divines. And my Corrupted Blood Jewel is, of course, going strong. Got another cluster here, and I'm still using Martial Prowess plus Tempered Arrowheads, though I think I probably could use something else as I got quite a bit of accuracy from a Quiver upgrade. More about that in just a second. Now, the previous version of my build was already pretty tanky. But the biggest difference between the old version and the new version, aside of the fact that I finally stopped being lazy and fixed my ring, is I'm wearing Progenesis, which is an incredibly powerful defensive flask that in many situations makes you nearly immortal. The build does have a few flaws, such as the absolutely massive single hits that you face from uber bosses, or non-ailment damage over time. Ailments, pretty much completely fine. I can ignore poison and I'm immune to ignite, shock, etc. Bleed can be problematic if you run around, but stand still and you'll leech up. I also swapped up my skills a bit, so I'm going to go over them quickly. So my auras are the same. Nothing changed here, though in theory I probably should get a different bow, replace this with an Enlighten 4, and replace Herald of Agony with something else. If you can get Chance to Poison on your bow, then you don't need Herald of Agony. In my boots, I've got Haste, which I'm just using for Fall Haste, though if I replaced Herald of Agony, it would be Haste that I'd run. Frostblink for movement, which I probably should have qualityed, but I totally forgot about. Mana-Forged Arrows for Frenzy of Onslaught, just to trigger Onslaught. Scourge Arrow of Menace, of course. Linked up to Mana-Forge, GMP, the level doesn't matter, that only scales the hit. Unbound Ailments, Storm Rain, and Inspiration Support. Then I've got Steelskin, Berserk, Cast When Stunned, Temporal Chains. Now for a lot of the gameplay footage, you saw Mirage Archer, Awakened GMP, Caustic Arrow of Poison, Awakened Elemental Damage of Attacks, Awakened Unbound Ailments, and Awakened Deadly Ailments. However, I was testing this versus Vicious Projectiles, and I believe that Vicious Projectiles ultimately feels better. I was kind of hesitant to go below the 4.0 APS, and kind of worried about triggering Mana-Forge in general. But at this point, my gear is so good that it doesn't really matter, and I found that having the extra leech was probably the difference between living and dying in a couple of rare instances where I did in fact die. So, Deadly Ailments, it was fun to test. You can always throw it into your Mana-Forge in place of GMP if you want to deal with a Reflect map real quick, though I just generally advise skipping Ellie Reflect, but I would run Vicious Projectiles. And speaking of maps and map mods, the only thing you absolutely cannot run is Ellie Reflect, but Cannot Leech is really annoying. You might not like Minus Max either. That's some of the cases where I've died. And personally, I just don't find it all that fun to click the altar that uncaps my lightning resistance. Again, some of these definitely come down to personal preference, but I would 100% advise avoiding Ellie Reflect at a minimum. And again, personally, I really don't like less recovery rate or Cannot Leech. So what about my gear? What's changed and what hasn't changed? First up, the bow has not changed, including me being too lazy to recraft the suffixes, because I'm pretty darn close to dot cap already. I'm pretty sure if I fixed the suffixes, I would be at dot cap. This ring also hasn't changed, because it's perfect and doesn't need any improvement. Then I have these stealth gloves. I wanted to shift around my resistances a little bit, and this was a good way to get some extra life. The reason that I wanted to do this is I got Suppress on a Watcher's Eye, so I didn't need it on gloves anymore. The easiest way to craft something like this is to get Fractured Chaos Res. Just throw essences at it until you hit one or more good suffixes, then maybe you get lucky and hit Hybrid Life like I did. For the ring, I suggest buying it, get good suffixes, then do Suffixes Can't Be Changed via Wild Bristle Matron, Veiled Chaos, bam, you're good. For the bow, I have a crafting guide, which I'll link up in the card and down below. For a helmet, I just bought it, and I generally would advise buying it. I really like the accuracy. As it turns out, that makes the rest of the gearing process much easier. And I kept the reduced mana cost of attacks and Fizz from hits taken as cold. Really, any Fizz taken as is fine, but cold or fire is ideal due to Taste of Hate and Dying Sun. For my lightning coil, it's the exact same lightning coil from before. I probably should have gotten a double corrupt one. Now, if you want, you could get a double corrupted one with something like Life or Max Res, but I don't have one, and honestly, it's probably not worth the cost. For my belt, it's the beautiful Micro Distillery belt that I crafted in my Micro Distillery belt crafting video. Link to that up in the card and down below. I ended up going with one that added quite a bit more damage, even if it came at a cost of a little bit less life. But hey, the reduced flask charges used makes it much easier to maintain both Progenesis and Dying Sun on single target, so to me, it was fully worth it. Then the stealth boots. Yes, I know that's crafted movement speed. It should be ashling, but if I remove the prefixes, then I have to recraft my boots. So I didn't. But if you want to learn how to craft them for yourself, I did make a video. And yes, before, the weakest part of my gear was a terrible ring that I wasn't using. I've fixed that now. I even got a little bit of Fizz to attacks. Not enough to kill me to reflect or anything, but enough to add a tiny bit of damage. and some nice rarity of items found for even juicier Arch-Nemesis conversion explosions. I didn't need another suffix. Sure, I could have probably got something like Chaos Res and shifted my gear around, but rarity is a nice thing to pick up, especially this league, so I was perfectly happy to sacrifice the suffix. Following with a pattern, the Defiance of Destiny is exactly the same item as before, being used for exactly the same reasons. Check out my video on Defiance of Destiny if you want to know why this item is just so dumb. And last but not least, I recrafted my quiver because I wanted accuracy. Technically I wanted +1 arrow, but about 5 quiver bases and a couple hundred essences later, I didn't hit +1 arrow once. I'm happy with this, and so we're going to call it good. Like with a lot of the other thought process, I went with attack speed because I'm not so worried about hitting that 4.0 APS breakpoint. Now that Mana Forged Arrows is only roughly 20% of my DPS, well, if I'm slightly off, I'm losing, 1 or 2% of my total DPS as opposed to the, 5-ish% before when it was at about half. So this was a change that I was perfectly happy to make. My tincture, same as always. Ideally, I'd want Rage +2 Proj, but that's insanely expensive and basically doesn't exist. Dying Sun for +3 projectiles. Quicksilver, because build felt a little bit slow without it. It's really easy to maintain. Taste of Hate for defenses. Progenesis for functional immortality. Those are the flasks I'm using, the gear I'm wearing, and a little bit of how I crafted it. Now, if you want to take a look at an export of my character, a POB as the kids call them, then head over to my Discord. The link is down in the description. When you join, head over to the rules, react to give yourself both the community and notification roles, then head over to the Build Link archive channel and check out the POB there. But okay, it's been a little bit since I talked about my build, what have I been up to, and how has it performed? The first thing was, I took on several Uber bosses. I took on Uber Eater, I took on Uber Exarch, I took on Uber Elder, and I took on Uber Shaper. I was mostly just doing this because I had a challenge that said, do 4 Uber bosses. So I did a bunch of Uber bosses. And it mostly went really well. The Meteor phase on Exarch, I could survive as long as my Progenesis was up. If my Progenesis wasn't up, I could take a bunch of Meteor Balls and die. The Eater, I could mostly face tank everything, just not the really big slams. Shaper, a very easy fight. Uber Elder was going great until right at the end I got overconfident. If you'll notice here, I was standing in the beam, and standing in the beam is bad. So, don't do that. Afterwards, I got right back in really quickly and finished the boss off without too much difficulty. There's a point where, on a poison build, your damage is capped. You won't get over dot cap no matter what you do. I mean, I guess on Ubers that's not quite true, but even on Ubers you can eventually reach dot cap. So after that, there's no point in scaling your DPS. And this is true of Ignite and all other dot builds as well. It's one of the reasons why I like them. I can get my damage to a point that's very comfortable for everything in the game, and then continue to scale my defenses so that I die less and less. And just to put that damage to the test, I went into a 100% Delirious Maze of a Minotaur. I then grabbed a good amount of Wisp Juice. Oh, and I made sure to roll extra enemy chaos resistance. I wanted this to be the nastiest, worst possible case scenario for any map that I would run. And yeah, it took me about 8 minutes, which isn't great. I fought both Omniphobia and Kosis, which is great, and I killed the Minotaur. So as it turns out, that was a great decision, and my build has plenty of damage for this map. Would I want a little more if I was going to be farming them? Maybe just for reliability, but overall it went well enough that I would say my build is more than 100% Delirious Wisp-empowered viable. But as for the rest of my mapping, I did change up my strategy a little bit, and I'll probably talk about that in a future video, because I wanted maps that felt a little different. Abyss is very powerful, but eventually I just got bored of doing them. And I also got a little annoyed with the fact that I kind of felt bad for killing the spires and should have actually left them spawn the enemies and all that, +2 proj nonsense. So instead, I went with a more Harbinger-focused strategy that I've been enjoying quite a bit. But you'll just have to stay tuned for a future video if you want to know how that turned out. Spoiler alert, I haven't actually run a test set of maps yet, so even I don't know the answer. Now this version of a build is not cheap. Last I checked, Progenesis was 60 divines and rising, and I don't really know how much I spent on the rest of my gear. For example, my quiver cost about 8 divines to craft, but I sold my old quiver for 24 divines, So did my quiver cost 8 divines, or did it cost -16? And what about the other 3 quivers I made, one of which already sold? Do I count that, or is it separate because technically I didn't wear it? See, when I'm playing Path of Exile, I don't really write down how much I spend. I don't really write down how much things cost. I mean, it's a fool's errand to do it anyway, because prices are constantly changing. Even by making this video, there's kind of the Path of Exile economy Eisenberg effect. The minute I say, this thing is 2 divines, unless it's something like a benchcraft, well, there's a good chance that a bunch of people will see that and go, well, 2 divines is really cheap, I'm gonna go buy it. And the price goes up. Or maybe some people will see, ooh, that's 2 divines, I could make some money farming that, and then the price goes down. By talking about it, I affect the price, so I exclude that from my build. But if you want to price check the core items, things like a high LED DPS bow, Defiance of Destiny, a corrupted lightning coil, a micro distillery belt, a good quiver. I mean, I'd say Taste of Hate is a core item. I don't think Progenesis is. Blood Notch and Immutable Force. And let's just say a couple of fractures. Well, you should have a decent idea of what it's going to cost you to put together a functional version of a build. And if you want something that is both functional and a little bit cheaper, then do check out my previous character. Though again, I have no idea how much it exactly cost, but it's what I played on League Start and I released that video fairly early on, so I can confidently say less than this one. But that's it. Thanks for watching. If you want to know more about this build or some of the mechanics it's using, then do check out some of the videos I've made specifically to talk about those points, which I'll link up in the card and down below. Or if you want to read up on Path of Exile in general, head over to MaxwellGG. That said, I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons and channel members for the continued support. Link to that is also below, and you might see your name on screen like these fine folks here. With that said, it's probably time to bring this build to a close, for real, and switch to something else. I have no idea what, but stay tuned for more. That's all for me today. Thanks for watching, hope you learned something. If you're playing the build, I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you again sometime soon.